we realized that the city we would like to come back to whenever we came to India is Banaras. I love the city as much as sometimes I hate it. I've grown up in different parts of India, and although I feel my origins in the land of Kashmir, which is where my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents belong to, I also feel myself a citizen of the country because I've lived in different places and I relate very well to people from different states of this country. I'm a modern city girl, and to find myself in the city of Banaras is a bit unusual because I would never have thought of ever coming and living in the city of Banaras. But my husband, who did his doctorate in the Banaras Hindu University, actually introduced me to the city. And what fascinated me about Banaras was how different realities could coexist together without stepping on each other's toes. My husband and I wanted to dialogue with this reality, to try and understand it, and also to bring it into our lives, because it gave us a feeling of authenticity, of let's say a quest for truth that people had within the ambience of the old city. The old cities have a different spirit, but also a different reason to be, or raison d'être, that's linked to the needs of people to feel each other, to interact with each other, to be in a community where interaction is closer, where cars are not there, where you move on bicycles or you move by foot and everyone knows each other. So it's a sort of a big village, a big community in the old city. The modern idea of development is change, is construction, is demolition and making new things and moving forward and leaving the old behind. And development is not necessarily that. Development is respect for the old culture and building on the strengths that you have and then going forward. So it's not built on the grave of the old. It's change that is built on the foundation of the old and on the strengths of what exists. And India is a very good example of how many cultures have assimilated into Indian culture and grown and evolved over periods, over years and centuries. The new has always come in keeping a respect and a space for the old. And Banaras is the epitome of this. You know, you can really feel that the development is happening, but it is also keeping respect and a space for the old. We bought an old house and we decided to renovate the old house and keep the architecture of the old house as it was, because old houses have a reason for their architecture, which is not just living spaces, but it's also the climatic need that gets translated into the sort of architecture of a house. So if it's a hot climate, then you have more spaces and more ventilation, cross ventilation. My husband is not Indian and belongs to Italy. We lived in the family a culture of dialogue. We wanted to make a non-government organization so that we could express this culture of dialogue also in the culture of partnership between different countries, between different religions, between different cultures, in a sort of testimony in a city which has actually been witness to various cultures migrating and settling in it.
I think of India by and large as a democratic country, even though there are very big limitations to Indian democracy. But it is an open society with freedom of expression and with many opportunities to become part of various forms of democratic action, which could be, as you say, trying to influence policymakers through media or various forums or talking to members of parliament. But it can also involve other things like maybe going to court, doing public interest litigation or public demonstrations. So I think of it not just as, influencing policymakers is part of this whole engagement, but it's more importantly being part of a democratic process, which can be very rich in spite of all the limitations of Indian democracy.
We found an old building which was not on the Ganga as we would have liked it to be, but we found it just behind a big palace, which was, in the moment that we bought the house, was bought by a chain of hotels. this building, this palace, was sold by a king, and the hotel wanted to utilize this palace for making a hotel, and so they started demolishing. And we realized that there was no law that could prevent anyone from demolishing an old building. And at that point, despite our attempt to take dialogue as the way to resolve a problem, we were catapulted into fight for protecting heritage. One of the major directives of the state government of Uttar Pradesh was a directive that nothing could be constructed 200 meters from the Ganges, from the river Ganga, and this was being flouted. So we finally, after running from, as they call, pillar to post, from government authorities to local stakeholders to the media to press conferences, we realized that nothing was working. And so we decided to take to the court as a last resort.
And do you think that we need NGOs for supporting development activities around the world?
Well, I would say yes, because I work for an international NGO, so I'm always going to say that. But I think the reason why I say that is because civil society, a robust civil society, is hugely important in terms of both democratisation and hearing a voice for people. And I think NGOs play, and I broad base it out of non-government organisations into civil society as a whole, because I include the media. I think the freedom of press, for example, in India is one of its major strengths, and if you suppress freedom of media, and that's the internet, Twitter, Google, anything, you suppress development. So I have a much more inclusive definition of civil society, not just NGOs, but massively crucial for the success of a nation state.
The NGOs very often feel that you should involve the NGOs. We also agree with that, in the sense that we have a national policy for the voluntary sector, which says that there's a lot of experience that, in many programs, good NGOs, when they get involved, improve the quality of implementation of the program, and we encourage people to involve good NGOs. But the decision to involve the NGO has to be taken by the local political body. I very often meet NGOs who tell me, well, look, this is a good NGO, so why don't you tell the panchayats to work with them? And that we cannot do. We cannot start saying one NGO is better than another NGO. It is the local body that controls the decision that has to choose the NGO.
There are 3 processes that are required in order to protect any cultural, architectural resource in any place. First is increasing the awareness of people about the value of their resource, about the need to protect it, and about the way to link it with socio-economic development. Because unless you do that, people don't support any kind of conservation. They usually prefer development and change rather than conservation of what is old. Because they don't see any socio-economic benefit. The second thing that one needs to do is documentation. Unless you document and bring forth the actual value of the resource, it's difficult to explain why that resource needs to be protected. And the third thing is legislation. Formulating legislation, designing legislation, and implementing legislation. And in this, either the government has it, and the government has already formulated a legislation that is not being applied, or there is no legislation, so there needs to be new legislation designed to protect that resource.
There is a danger when you touch a person's economic living or stability, which hotel owners get very tense about. It could even be possibly dangerous, because there is a undercurrent in Banaras as kind of the Wild West of India.
It is the ethical responsibility of each of us educated people, to raise our voices, to take up a stand and do something about it, not to just wait for government mechanisms to work, or to say government mechanisms will never work. Because if we privileged educated people don't do something about this, don't take up the cause and stand for it, no one will.
So I think in terms of the evaluation, the development evaluation, one has to move away from projects to say, for UN, what is the power of ideas? What is it doing? What are the kinds of injustices in society that the UN is able to highlight that national governments will never do?
Yesterday there was a demonstration which was carried out by traditionalist Indian political party, and they were asking the local authorities to arrest me. Now, why did they want to arrest me? Why do they want to arrest me? They feel that the public interest litigation that the Kautilya Society has done in the High Court of Allahabad is wrong, is against the people's wishes, and it's against development. Actually, the public interest litigation that the society started some 7 years back was done on the request of the local authorities and the eminent citizens and NGOs of this city. Because we were in a moment of history, a moment of Banaras's development that required that the beautiful ghats of Banaras were protected. And
Protect against what?
protected against the wrong ideas of development, which associate development with construction and construction of new buildings, rather than building on what exists and developing it to become a resource for the community. Because that's why Banaras exists. It exists because of its religious importance, its cultural importance. We have a lot of international tourists that come here. Something like 25,000 pilgrims come here every day and leave it. But they come here for the ghats, for the ashrams, for the temples, and these need to be protected because they are the source of livelihood of the people. The administration and the people of the city got together in a committee and decided that there was need for protecting this. There was also a project of the Japanese International Agency that wanted to take a ghat as a model to see how to develop it, basing it on the resource of the traditional economic, social dynamics of that particular ghat. And they asked the Kautilya Society to do a stakeholder analysis and understand what people want, so that what the JICA wants, what the Japanese wanted, what the local administration wanted, and what the people wanted was in consensus. The Heritage Committee that was established by the district authorities felt that the enlistment of these beautiful ghats of Banaras into the World Heritage List of UNESCO actually would have helped make people aware of the importance not only to Banaras but to humanity of this unique treasure that is not only architecturally beautiful but also culturally, religiously important and of value. And the only way to get it into the World Heritage List of UNESCO, as UNESCO told us, was to get laws made and implemented that protect the city as well as allow the city's heritage to become a resource for development. This was the reason that the district authority and the political people at that time asked the Kautilya Society to go ahead into the court and lodge a public interest litigation to protect these ghats. While on the parallel line, the government mechanism would have continued, because the government mechanism would have taken much longer. The Varanasi Development Authority and the local authorities actually together submitted an affidavit to the court which had a list of all the illegal buildings on the ghats, asking the court to make orders for facilitating them to decide the future of these buildings. That's how the list of illegal buildings became known, and steps started being taken by the court in order to decide and ask the local authorities to demolish these buildings, or at least to resolve the status of these buildings so that they're no longer considered illegal. In the last 1 year or so, there's been a judge bench which has been constituted only for the Ganga and the problems of the river as well as the ghats. And this judge bench looked at the list of VDA, of the list submitted by the VDA of illegal constructions, and asked VDA to give it a timeline of what they would do and when they would do in order to resolve the status of these illegal buildings. So when the VDA went to demolish the buildings on the ghats, there were massive demonstrations of the people against the authorities, and at that point the officers of the authorities who were facing the people face to face said that they were not responsible, and they justified their action by saying that it was Kautilya Society that was responsible. They put the blame on us and said that we were responsible for all the demolition. But we were not responsible. It was the local authorities that were responsible for this. And they created a kind of conflictual situation between us and the people.
Instead, we as a civil society were asked by the authorities to be the cushion between the people and the authorities and to create a dialogue and social participation. And instead of that, the officers who were ineffective and corrupt put the blame on us. So they resolved their situation, but putting the blame on us, they put the people against us. What has happened is now that there are demonstrations against us, putting pressure on the VDA to do something to force us to withdraw the public interest litigation, because the public interest litigation damages the interests of the businesses and the people here. And the administration, instead of saying to the people that they are illegal and they have violated the law and this is what needs to happen when you violate the law, says what it does is it lodges a FIR against us. That is, it lodges a criminal case against us.
On which base?
On the basis that our organization actually is not legal. The various activities that we do are not legal, because this is the only way they can force us to withdraw the public interest litigation, by cancelling our registration.
What is that the Cultural Society would do illegally?
No, we are doing nothing illegally, because whatever we are doing, we are sharing it with the authorities, and they have been renewing our registration, and they've been saying that whatever you're doing is illegal. But this is a way of pressurizing and harassing mentally, so that you get so tired of it, you say, well, I was asked by the authorities originally to work on this. If they don't want it, why the hell am I doing it? But the problem is not only here with the officers. The problem is also in some of the business people who think that money can buy everything. And they feel that an NGO should not be the one teaching them what is right and wrong, that they know from before what is right and wrong. So the need for an NGO there's no need for an NGO in this society. It's the business people who can decide what they need to do, or the political people who can decide what they want to do, colluding together for doing this, right? Which is what has been happening. They've been hand in glove in doing this. They also think that not only an NGO, but even women who are now coming to affirm themselves in society and playing a much bigger social role need to be stopped. But these are not the true traditionalists. These are people who are bigots. They feel they are empty. They don't have any longer the spirit of tradition. Because if they had, they would actually understand and value the need for people to move along with time. And they themselves would carry the spirit along and understand that today there is a need for women to come out and talk. But they feel that me as a woman coming out to talk against them as men is a kind of conflict that I'm creating and I'm doing, and that I'm not actually here to empower, but I'm here to fight against them. So they have to crush me. Yeah, they have to use violence on me, because that's what they understand as the language. That's their language. But it's not people who are traditional, because there are many people who are traditional who are actually supporting me, because they realize that the need for NGO role, just like the need for the role of women, which was not there earlier. Neither civil society was so important, nor were women so important before in terms of public participation. But now it's becoming important, because women are becoming educated, they're becoming aware, they want to be part of the entire process, social process of participation and development. But these people don't realize, they're actually short-sighted. They don't realize that winning today is going to make them lose in the longer term. And that what we are saying and what we are bringing forth is a process of dialogue and participation. It's not a process, it's not what we want is not conflict. What we want is that there's a consensus to create those kind of laws that will make the enabling environment for even civil society and business to be able to function in a just manner. Because it's only when there is justice that there's going to be peace. And if there's no justice, this kind of conflict is going to become worse. And that's not what we want. We want dialogue, we want to protect the castle of Banaras, but not at the cost of a conflict in the city.
How people think that Allahabad court would issue orders just on the basis of a Kautilya society against the government laws?
No, Allahabad High Court cannot do that. The Allahabad High Court cannot just ask laws to be implemented on my whims and fancies. There are laws, they have not been implemented. The VDA has said that we have not been able to implement these laws and that there are violations of laws, and the VDA has said that we would like to make sure that laws are implemented. We are not the protagonists, we are actually helping in order to give the instruments to the VDA to be able to do its role, which it's not doing.
And what about the press? The press was very active in India now to defend the woman in the case of violence. So you're doing a social work here. What about the press of Banaras? Why are not they supporting you?
The press is for sensational news. And I think what they don't realize, they also don't know what the matter is. They have not come to me to ask. But also I think it's time for the Kautilya Society to go into public and talk to people and allow this sensational news environment of the press to be stopped and to come into a more dialogic way of communicating with the people. I think it's time we need to go to the press now.
Students in India have been very active in trying to protect the woman against all these new cases of rape or raping that have been emerging in India. What would you like now, you as a woman in danger and threat, to tell to the students now?
I think the students need to rise up to protect their city. And the students need to rise up to squash this violence that is happening against civil society itself, because this violence that is happening is not against me personally. It's against the very existence and role and need and presence of the civil society and the women in society. So it's not a direct physical violence, but it's a mental violence that actually pushes the women to go back into their homes. Yeah, so it's a very, very subtle violence. And if the youth don't come up now and say, no, we want each of us, women and men, to participate in our social, in the development of our city, it's not going to happen also. It's not even going to happen because I want it to happen. It will happen only when the people want it to happen. And the people have to make the choice, not me. So if the youth of Banaras today, the youth of Banaras need to come up and say that civil society and women have a vital role in any kind of development that has to take place, and they actually represent that kind of traditional resource that needs to be led out and even become leaders of this new social movement. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
So actually, when you protect the environment, what you want to do is to protect the opportunities of the new generations.
Of course, of course. When you protect the social environment, when you protect the natural environment, you're actually creating resources for the future. There's a very important Indian chief, Native American chief, who says that these resources that we have, whether it's natural resources or social resources, are not ours that we have inherited. We've actually borrowed it from the future generations. And that's what it is. That's what it is.